All right. So thanks all for joining us today, and we're going to jump right in. So we want to talk about how we're using specifically progressive summarization, which is a part of Tiago's, a technique within Tiago's Building a Second Brain course, how we're using it in higher ed. And we've already introduced ourselves. So first off, I want to describe for those who are either in the room or online who don't know what progressive summarization is yet. I'm going to try to summarize it as a note-taking process that enables students to do three things. One, organize for easy retrieval later. Two, capture their learning based around passions, questions, and interests. And three, design notes using layering techniques to make that information more interactive as well as glanceable. And I'll explain what these mean in a second here. The aim is to support the needs of the future self, future student, as they're going through either this semester, their midterms, their final paper, etc.
Sorry.
Okay. Tiago, you getting the call? All right. So, but before we jump into the three pieces, why use progressive summarization in a classroom? So I believe that maybe this is indicative of my teaching style, but I believe that the most valuable thing that students will take from the class isn't what I tell them, but more the notes that they take throughout the course. That their notes are the most important artifact from that class. So I want to try to help organize and create notes that are not only useful in 3 months, but can be useful in 4 years or 6 years. So to do that, we have to provide some kind of process around taking notes and organizing them. Make them easily accessible for retrieval while they're working on their papers, etc. It also is one of the things that when I was taking the course with Tiago, I realized that, if I would have learned this process as a first-year student, I would have an enormous knowledge bank at the end of 4 years. Think about all the notes, all the research that you accumulate. So I'm trying to sort of get us in that direction of not just thinking about what did I learn in this particular class lecture or in this one class this semester, but over the course of 4 years, that's a lot of knowledge that one can amass. And then the last piece around progressive summarization in the classroom is David Allen's brains are for having ideas, not for holding them. So this idea that that our brains aren't so much built around retention as recognition and matching pattern recognition. So first, organize. So in the class, the first day of class, instead of spending most of the time talking about the syllabus, we go over how to take notes and how to set up the notes in a way that they'll be easily organized. So I walk students through creating a folder that's for that specific class. So REL 110, Introduction to Quakerism. And then we look at how to create each Google document based on a book, an article, etc., using a really basic naming convention, author's last name, first name, and title. Just something that, as you amass more and more notes, it makes sense sort of where things are at. And then at the top of that Google note, putting in a link to Goodreads, any kind of publisher information that, again, 3 months later when they're working on their final paper, it's right there. They don't have to go look for it anywhere, especially if it's a book that they had on library loan or something like that. So just making it easy for their future self. Okay, the second piece is capture. And I'm sort of thinking about capture a little bit differently, maybe than a quick capture in using Siri to take a note or something like that, which is fine. But here, thinking about as they're reading, as we're reading through required readings or research, students are often looking for or sort of setting them up to look for what they're most interested in, what they're most passionate about. So we use Tiago's exercise around the 10 most favorite problems. What I'll often call in our class are big questions. And I'll have students kind of work through, spend some time in the first or second day of class coming up with 10 big questions that they have for the class. So, why are you in this class? And it has to go beyond, this is required for my gen ed major, okay, I understand. But, at the end of this class, what do you hope to take away with you? What are some big questions that you bring? Because then that's going to be the filter through which you're going to read and start to, like a coat hanger, kind of hang your knowledge on. So here are two, just as an example, here are two questions that students used a year ago in my Introduction to Quakerism class. And I'm sharing this. The names of the innocent have been hidden. So the first question is, what is the relationship between religion and trauma? And how do we use or not use that relationship to make the world better? That's a great big question. And if that's one of 10 questions you're working on all semester, you're going to find all kinds of interesting stuff. And then it's likely that they might do a research project around an individual who, is kind of dialoguing with this question, or maybe the final paper is responding back to this question. And we do things throughout the semester where we will open up our questions again and kind of look and see where are we at with all of this. Another question is, a lot of religions have a connection between their beliefs and nature and the natural world. Do those connections exist within Quakerism? And if so, what are the religious beliefs that Quakers have around nature? So another great question, and I just was showing this to you for an example. Okay, and then lastly is our design. And in Building a Second Brain, Tiago talks a lot about designing your notes. So one, we want to do that because you're now interacting with the content. You're not just reading a book. Now you're typing it out, you're formatting it, you may be adding some links to add background, maybe adding a picture. We're trying to balance that tension between context, which is, just paragraph after paragraph of explanation, background, with compression, 5 bullet points and 6 words on each bullet point. So you want something in between those two things so that in 3 months, in 1 year, when you come back to this, you're not going to remember what the author, you may not remember the specific things the author said, so help yourself out a little bit. What's the kind of in between there? And then the last piece that I stress with students is making it glanceable. So that's adding bold to key parts of a quote or a bulleted list, highlighting specific pieces so that in an 8-page document of notes, you could skim it in 60 seconds and grab the key parts that you need for your final research paper. And it's really interesting. I mean, I have noticed the quality of citations and quotes and the breadth that students are pulling from has increased using this method because, I mean, you sit down to write a paper after 15 weeks, you're pulling on 30 documents of notes, I mean, which are searchable through Google, etc. So it really helps to increase learning. Okay, here's some things that I invite students to keep in mind when they take notes: key ideas, narratives, important people, themes, etc. And then here's just a final little checklist that I share just as a way to kind of help jog students' memories as they're kind of going through their reading. So that's all. That's what I have. So now I want to turn it over to Jor, Allison, and Matha for them to talk a little bit about how they're using progressive summarization in their work.
Hello again, I'm Jor, and I'm excited to be sharing with you all about how progressive summarization has come into my life. I've taken 2 classes with Wes, and I'm currently in his contextual theology class, where we're doing progressive summarization notes for each class period. So when I came into Guilford, I came with a background in design. I did some design work, graphic design work in high school as a way to make a little bit of money. And so visual hierarchy as a principle has always been a part of my life and something that was really important when I was working with clients, but not something that I ever brought into my own notes. The organization was important in my work. It was not something that I took home with me or brought into my academic life almost at all. I'd be scared to show you all my backpack now. But one thing I can attest to is I'm now much more organized in my notes. So up on the screen here, you can see the example of my file folder for my contextual theology class this semester. So these are all of the notes that I'm currently working on and returning to. So one of the things I really like to do when I'm starting a document out, especially if we're doing a whole entire book, like for example, we read the entirety of this book, Models of Contextual Theology, is to use Google Documents Table of Contents feature. If you go to Insert and then Table of Contents, every time that you make a header in Google Docs, it will appear at the top of your document. So this is a really, really easy way for me to kind of have a series of jump links so I can go immediately to chapter 3 or chapter 8 if I want to at the start of my document. So that's a practice I like to have with my notes in particular. And here up on screen is kind of an example of what a typical note page would look like for me. As you can see, a large part of it are direct quotes from the text, which I find very useful, especially in paper writing, so I can draw from there. I like to start everything with a page number, so citation is easy. When possible, I like to take diagrams from the text and put them into my notes, especially if I'm working from PDF. That's super helpful. And then if you can see kind of down the page, the pink text, that's where I like to put my own notes. I like to kind of tab that in so it's offset. And so I can see where I'm making commentary versus where I'm taking the words of other people or summarizing the words of other people. And then one last really cool thing I'd like to point out is one thing we do in our class is we share all of our notes with Wes. So this is an opportunity for us to be in dialogue with our professor even outside of the classroom, because he looks through our notes, and not only looks through them, but comments on them. So I have his commentary like saved in my notes forever. So if I'm returning back to contextual theology, not only do I see my own commentary, I get to see his too.
Hi, so thank you all for joining us again. So as a health sciences and religious studies major, you can imagine how much reading and research I have to look into on a weekly basis. Progressive summarization has really helped me. I was introduced to it in Wes's introduction to Quakerism class last semester. Ever since, I've been implementing Tiago's model of progressive summarization, whether in other classes or in my personal endeavors. So through progressive summarization, I feel like I am better able to break down, comprehend, and analyze challenging readings. And I can also easily make connections, whether to those readings in class or to materials outside of the classroom. One of the challenging things I found about progressive summarization is transcribing my concept mapping or mind mapping that I do on paper and transcribing that online. But I think one of the biggest takeaways from progressive summarization is the concept of investing in your future self. You know, looking at your notes, for example, my notes here, it's not an eyesore to look at, whether it's for the next class or whether it's by the end of the semester and you have a final paper coming up, or whether it's in 4 to 7 years when you're sitting down writing your thesis and your dissertation. You really I think progressive summarization is an individualized experience, and what makes it an individualized experience is the big questions that you start off with. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. So here's an example of my notes where I include images so that when I look back at my notes, I easily understand, okay, like, what's going on here. And I also screenshot tables or charts that are included in the readings.
Thank you. I'm Allison again. I think that Guilford is more of a writing intensive school. And so a lot of my assignments tend to be essays and sort of like talking about what I gained from the readings. And a lot of what I found with progressive summarization is that it's so much easier for me to take the snippet from this reading and then compare it to this reading, and sort of like put that all together. I just had my midterm papers due this weekend, and I've noticed just how much more organized I am with progressive summarization, where I can easily go through everything that we've done for the past few weeks and connect everything very well. And I was also drawing on some things that I had learned last semester, and I was implementing progressive summarization in some of my classes, but not all of them as I am now. And I had to like go through all my papers and things, and it was just so much harder to organize everything. And I've also been using Evernote this semester. And with Evernote, I can scan all of my paper things that I want to be with my notes. And then I can also mark all over those. And then I can also do all the highlighting things in Evernote. So that's been really helpful to me. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so thank you all. That was great. Why don't we take a minute, and we'll stop for a second and see if there are any questions. Oh, can I make this a little bit smaller somehow? There we go. Okay. So if we want to see if there's questions from either anybody in the room or anyone online, and then we'll move on to our next piece.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you all. Really, really cool to see, real examples of notes that you're using in your classes. And my eye was, of course, automatically drawn to the main points that you had highlighted for me, which is exactly the point. I don't see anything in the chat. If anyone attending, we have 8 people online, wants to add any questions to the chat, feel free. But I have one. I'm wondering, what has the adoption been like across the class? Like, do you think this sort of highlighting technique is sort of more geared to a certain kind of person, like an especially detail-oriented person or an especially already organized person or someone who already likes to read? Or is adoption across the class more even?
What do you all think? I mean, I can speak to my piece, but I wonder.
I've noticed like for some classes that I'm less interested in and I don't really like the course material, I'll just summarize a lot less and it will take me a lot less longer, and my notes won't be as good. But I think that there is kind of a place for everyone, because everyone, like, I think there's people who just don't even take notes, and like if you're not even going to take notes, this isn't going to be something that you can use. But if you are going to take notes, I think that this is a good way. And you can kind of choose how much you progressively summarize, which I think helps.
Cool.
I wouldn't be able to speak to how everyone in our classes like adoption across the board.
Well, so we're going to have you all do so especially if you can get on Zoom, it'll be helpful for those in the room. We're going to have you go through a process that we do in class also, because I found that it takes a little bit of time in the beginning to sort of onboard folks into doing this. And then usually by the end of the semester, everybody is doing a great job on their notes. Now the question is whether or not that gets carried over into other classes or into or after that semester. And I think that I don't know. Obviously these 3 students here are all doing it and have done it. And I think there are some others. I've actually kept a list of all the students I've taught it to, so that I could go back and survey them eventually and ask kind of, are you still using some version of this? But I think that one thing that might keep students from doing it, honestly, is I think that it might feel like a high threshold. In my class, the assignments are based around doing these notes this way. So I'm not asking them to do anything extra in that way. But for a lot of classes where this would really be an extra layer to the work that they're being given, it is probably going to be up to students who are really into this to keep it going. So I think that would be the challenge.
I also wonder, I teach skills-based courses, not content-based courses. And so, in my first year writing classes where, yes, I want them to annotate their readings and take notes on the readings, but really what I want them to be taking notes on for their future selves is more about the writing skills and the moves and and they have no idea how to take notes about that. They don't even know, I have to prompt them, okay, this is something that you'll want to put down in your notes because you'll need it later or whatever. And then they'll just write what I wrote down on the board. And so it's not their notes, it's my notes, which won't make as much sense to them. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how to apply this in that specific circumstance.
Gosh, yeah, great point. It's like the meta stuff, right? The ideas or the principles that are going to last beyond any given book, any given class, any given topic. But that you have to, I mean, that meta level awareness is like, that's the gold medal of learning, kind of. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I wonder. And Tiago, I see there's a mention about mind mapping. So, what's up?
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, Nathan, do you want to talk about mind mapping, and do you see it connected to progressive summarization, or kind of where are you in that? Is that kind of is that a process you use?
Sure, yeah. I use mind mapping and concept mapping, especially for my science-based classes. I find it easier to kind of visualize, my note-taking process. I think that throughout my process of learning how to progressively summarize, I've found websites that can transcribe, mind mapping and concept mapping.
Have you incorporated any of it, or have you taken like screenshots and put it into your notes, or
yes,
done
I
any of
have.
that kind of thing? Or
Yeah, it's not in it's on the PowerPoint. I tried it out once, but I am still struggling with just kind of getting used to transcribing it online and training myself to get used to that.
Cool. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions or complaints at this point in the program? Yes,
This is mostly for the students. Before this, did you primarily take notes on paper or digitally, and how are you marrying the two?
Prior to this, I took notes exclusively on paper. And I still do that sometimes, as I love to draw, and sometimes sketching will come into my notes. But I have found this to be really useful because as someone, I can speak, I'm not a very organized person in all aspects. I can't lose these notes. I love the cloud. So I've been trying to transition more into digital notes because it's not something I can lose, and I'm also able to search through them, which is something I cannot do with my written notes. So sometimes I have been sort of like Nathan says, on occasion I have if I want something drawn or it's important to me that it's written, I've tried to be better about scanning things into my notes that are like in these folders, so that I can kind of have the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, I also primarily did written notes, and I think that's kind of just like what we're taught in public schools. It's a lot about like retention, and you want to memorize all these things. But since I've been coming to college, I think that it's a lot more about retrieval, and I don't need to memorize all of these things if I can refer to them and like go back to my notes and just like trigger my thoughts and stuff. And I think that also because this is a writing intensive school and I haven't taken very many exams, like written exams, it's much easier for me to like write a paper based on retrieval rather than memorization.
Yes, I also, I exclusively was like a note-taking person on paper. Of course, like through the introduction of this model, it's really made me revisit my note-taking skills in a lot of ways. But I think, you know, like Alice and Andor said, because Guilford is a very writing-intensive school, a lot of like academic journals, you know, you can find on online databases. So it really makes the process easier, I think, because you're typing it out rather than having to print out a journal and write over it. Or,
Okay, we're here now.
Okay, cool. So why don't you just take us through it since we're such a small group?
Okay, that sounds good. So one of the things that makes this kind of a fun activity is we have a classroom here on campus that has like 20 Chromebooks, so we can have all the students get online and project this document up on the screen. So it's a bit more, it's a little bit less clunky than trying to do it the way we're just trying to do it. So having said that, what I would do is I would have a group of people look at this first paragraph here, team one. Maybe everybody online would look at that one, and then everybody in this group here on campus would look at team two. And basically what we're trying to do is start to progressively okay, now I'm not scrolling. Let's go. Here we go. Okay. We want to start to progressively summarize this document. So first off, we have to read it. So why don't we take a minute and just kind of read through a little bit. And anybody who's on this document, as you're reading it, if you see something that seems really critical to this letter, bold it. Sure. I could get on my So as you're reading it, I invite you to bold anything in here that catches your imagination, seems like it might be significant. Remember, you're now in an introduction to Quakerism class, so you want to be able to come back to this later. Okay. Fancy. All right, so now we've gone through, we've read it once, we've bolded some things. Allison got a little extra fancy in here and linked to, where's that? This line here, whose dominion is over all to the ends of the earth. That's actually a piece. So this letter is from George Fox, who is one of the co-founders of the Quaker movement. And he was known for basically plagiarizing the heck out of the Bible. So he would just constantly quote things from the Hebrew Testament and the New Testament without ever citing anything. And so this is also a great example to students of what they should never do in an academic classroom. But but we also kind of do a little bit of hunting around to find where there are passages of scripture sort of embedded in the text. Okay, so the next step would be then to go through, and why don't we highlight a couple things. So we've bolded some stuff. So maybe there's 1 or 2 places, 3 places in here that seem that you really want to be able to catch is immediately when you open this document. So what would we highlight? One thing I would highlight is this top passage here. Answering that of God in them all. This is a phrase that in the class we've learned that George Fox comes back to a lot. So what is that all about? And then keeping the wisdom of God and bring all into worship. Does anybody want to say why they highlighted those other 2 pieces?
That was me. I don't know. There's something about that phrase that seems to capture a lot of what's going on here.
Okay. It's a
Like
good,
there's like a collecting or a gathering of many things into the worship of God. So I almost think of that as that. I mean, that could even be the heading of this.
Great. Yes. And you could do that, right? We could go in and we could add, let's do it. We're going to add a little subheading or maybe a summarization. And we like to use a different font. Ooh, that's not a great font. Use a different font for our kind of personal comments. So something like that. Okay, so we've done just a little bit, but already this one paragraph that seemed a bit unwieldy when we started is starting to starting to pull apart some of the key pieces. So this is an exercise that we do in class, especially. I mean, again, this is 1656. George Fox is in prison and he's writing to followers. So it's not exactly the sort of language that you'll see on Snapchat very often or what students are accustomed to. Sorry. But we want. So this isn't easy reading. So having students work on it together, summarize some things, we can start to get down to maybe what was George Fox doing or saying in this document. So that's it.
Cool. So did you have anything else to show, or can we spend the last 10, 15 minutes talking about some of the implications of this?
Yeah, that's what we have. I think, we have one last slide here at the very end, which is just a way for, okay, wait, I gotta do it over here. We can just put this up while we're talking to you.
Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting. I think it's the fact that you're doing this in groups as part of classwork. It's kind of amazing, like how fundamental this kind of thing is. How to really create a document, how to take notes, how to analyze a text. It feels like strange. Like I definitely never learned anything like this in all my years of schooling. I'd love to hear from all of you. What do you think is why not? Like what is holding back, or what is needed to make this a fundamental part of different curricula? And how would you go about talking to professors or administrators or guidance counselors, everyone who's involved in this kind of thing to show them the value of this kind of practice.
Well, I like that it was modeling, because when you're taking notes, you're really actively reading. So I love that it is also active reading. And also for paper writing. I just think back to making note cards in college myself, and like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. So I think even this could be used without the Google Docs. I mean, it's a strategy that people were more comfortable with paper, that it could be done on paper as well. Of course, then there's the losing of the paper. I totally sympathize with that one too, but I think it could be an option.
I know that a lot of classes use collaborative, team, whatever the version of it is, but I think having collaborative notes could also be really helpful. And I could definitely see using this. I mean, the way that I try to structure the classroom is that physically people are already in groups, and they're having group conversations pretty much every single class, but they could also be taking group notes, which is not something that they're doing, mostly for, you know, I don't know whether I should be using technology in the classroom more actively or less actively, you know, because of Snapchat and the areas of it. But, and I think that it could also be thinking through like how it could be discipline specific or area specific, because I know some majors focus on processes as opposed to like, just like what is the content and going into textual analysis and things like that. So I think it could be adapted for different disciplines to think about like how to highlight different pieces and
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, I'm going to drop this link in the chat, which is a case study I did with a PhD in communication studies named Addison Shockley. And the way he had adapted it was very much along the lines of what you just said, Alex, was he realized that as a communication studies PhD, he knows exactly what he's looking for. You know, it's not just like, oh, this resonates, this seems important. He's like, no, I'm looking for like, you know, like theory. I'm looking for like direct quotes. I'm looking for like open questions. He had like 4 or 5 different categories. And so how he adapted progressive summarization was he used different highlighting colors. He would use different colors right at that point of reading. So instead of having to go back and like triage and categorize everything, right at the point of reading, he would just pick the color that corresponded to what he was seeing. And the way he was doing it, which you can see in that case study, is he was using a citation management tool, I think it was Zotero, to then, like Evernote natively doesn't support different colored highlights. You can't do different colored highlights. But what he would do is he would apply the highlights in the citation management tool and then export them to Evernote. And when he did it that way, those colors were preserved. So basically, he could have Evernote, which is much more modern and responsive than Zotero. It's a better interface that you would use more often throughout the day, but with the ability to go back to Zotero and find exactly the citation, exactly the source, and be able to cite it, which of course, you know, you have to do in academic papers, which is what he's writing. So I think you're very much right in that sort of like adapting it to certain disciplines.
And I think for me, part of the challenge has been just translating it. I mean, you know, this is not a pure form of progressive summarization. I don't need to tell you that, Tiago, but you know, so it's sort of this is 4 semesters and, you know, 6 to 8 classes worth of like constantly translating it down, trying to get it to a place where I can explain it to students quickly enough that they're not passing out, you know, or just like, why are we doing this? And then also like, so just trying to figure out how do I sort of extract, because this is a part of a much bigger system, you know, so I've extracted it and it's taken some time to get that to a point where I could explain it. And I don't even know if I'm there yet. I mean, but that's sort of been part of the challenge. And then how do I kind of work with folks over 15 weeks on this in a way that keeps them engaged and excited about it and connected to their questions and using it at the end of the semester. So there's some like habits, I think, or practice that's built in that has been a learning curve. Yeah, so I think that's at least part of it for me as we're sort of working on this. So it's fun to be able to share this. Obviously, we had to sort of sit down and and the four of us have spent some time together over the last month preparing and talking about, okay, how are you using this, and how can we talk about this in a way that would be useful. I think the other part of it is, in any given class, taking up any amount of time to talk about note-taking, there's a bit of, I think it's just self-imposed pressure, but it feels like I should be talking about the course content. I should be doing this. And here I am taking half a class or a class period talking to students about notes.
Yeah.
So,
and I commend you for that. It takes some courage, because it's from my experience in school, it's like everyone thinks this should be someone else's job. It's like the history professor is like, oh, this should be your English teacher. Your English teacher is like, oh, you should have learned this, early in your school career. It's like everyone is pointing the finger to someone else, because it's honestly just, I think, easier and more comfortable to focus on the content and not teach a skill that could apply to many other things. It just seems like it's not your job, right?
But it's interesting because you said the piece about it is self-imposed that people don't want to take the time, but I'm thinking about our chemistry department, which adopted a very particular model in which they teach all of their chemistry classes, and students come in and they learn it and they're so adapted to it. They're just no, every single class that they take in that department is going to be oriented in a particular way. And I think that that's so great, because in that way you're actually saving lots of time and you can focus on the content because students already understand the process. Whereas in all the other departments, students are, each time they've taken a class with a new professor, are learning what is the process in this class. So,
yeah, that's right.
Interesting. What kind of process is that? Is it a note-taking practice?
They use POGLE, which is they do collaborative team learning, and it's just a model in which they have teams and everybody has assigned roles. One of them is note-taking, and then all classes are structured in that way.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be insanely valuable.
I don't know what POGLE stands for. I'm bad at acronyms. Maybe somebody else knows.
You described it really well.
Great.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's any other comments or questions from folks, additions, subtractions.
Wes, did you want to say a little bit about these resources that you have up here on the screen?
I do, yes, thank you. So this first link links to a website that Jor built, and she did a great job. And we wanted to really distill down how we're using progressive summarization in a classroom and just create a nice little resource for folks who are on the call. And of course, this is Allison, linked to her research. She did some very interesting research with Tiago. So we'd love for you to crib anything from there that you can, and we'll add some more things to it. Also, I don't know everybody who's on the call, but certainly we would love to be in touch and hear how other people are using this, or be helpful in implementing it, or whatever the case may be. Then these other links, of course, link to the slideshow here, so you can use that. The progressive summarization checklist. And then this is an Evernote link here, creating reading notes. Goes to basically the Evernote that I share with all my classes that kind of walks folks through this process. So that's really it. And then of course a plug for Guilford College. So those are the things which we're happy to get in there and let you all know about. So yeah, that's kind of where we want to give you some resources, and we would love to hear from folks. continue this conversation in whatever way is appropriate. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This is really awesome. And I think I'm glad you plugged Guilford, because I think, you know, in the future, what is going to differentiate universities and education in general is these meta skills. It's like content now is limitless, free, ubiquitous, accessible everywhere. It's not going to be, oh, you have some special, you know, insight into history. Like everyone has access to all the same knowledge about history. It's going to be these meta skills and these processes and these procedures about how to actually make that knowledge your own and store it in a way that you can actually use it. So I think you're differentiating your college, and I think it's a huge service to your students who are going to be able to take not just these notes but these practices into the rest of their lives. So thank you for your pioneering work in this.
Absolutely, thank you. Thanks for all your help.
Yeah, and I do want to respect everyone's time, so let's finish on the hour, but I'll have this recording up on the Praxis blog, so you can all refer to it in the future as well, along with if you guys will allow all these links that you've provided so generously.
Yeah, please do.
Awesome, everyone. Well, thank you for coming, and I will see you online.
All right. Thanks, Tiago. Bye, everyone. Thank you.